All right, guys. Hope everybody's doing well. This is Mr. Cole, and this is an optional lecture. And this is Do People Get Mad at the United States? This is a lecture to review for the upcoming test. So we've talked a lot about the different imperialist motives the United States had and the different countries that we've taken over, but we've never talked about what's the response of the people who actually live in these countries. So this is Do People Get Mad at the United States? So we'll start with our biggest centerpiece we talked about with the Spanish-American War, and that's Cuba. The Treaty of Paris does not give Cuba to the United States, but rather grants Cuba its independence. But the U.S. Army doesn't leave. The U.S. Army stays behind as an occupying force. Now, as the U.S. Army stays, Cuba is beginning to work on their new constitution. And what the United States requires them to put in their constitution is the Platt Amendment. And we basically force them to sign it because we're keeping our military in their country until they sign it. What this says is that one, Cuba cannot go into debt. Two, Cuba can't be making deals with other countries. And that U.S. is allowed to intervene in Cuba if we need to. We also have Cuba allow us to buy some of their land for the Army and Navy. This is actually where the reason why Guantanamo Bay, which is a army camp in Cuba, now it's a prison where we keep suspected terrorists. But that's why that exists, is because at the time we bought this to be an army and navy base of Guantanamo Bay. We also make Cuba open for American businesses. As we talked about before, Americans wanted to invade Cuba partly for the resources that they have and the businesses that Americans have in Cuba. So we push that even stronger with the Platt Amendment. Overall, the Cuban people aren't exactly the happiest about this. Now, they're happy they have their independence. They do have independent rule of their country, but they're limited because of the United States. And this is ultimately going to lead to the Cuban Revolution that's going to happen in the 1950s and 60s. Another major piece of land that we got from the Spanish-American War was the Philippines. Now, the Philippines look and they go, hey, wait a minute. Other countries got their independence from this war. How come we just switched to be another colony of another country? And Emilio Aguinaldo, in 1899, he was a Philippine leader, and he decides to have the country rebel against the United States, and he becomes the leader of the rebellion. And so this is one of the first times, again, in our country's history we've had a rebellion other than our own civil war. So now we have another country rebelling and fighting for their independence against a country that claims to be the beacon of freedom in the world. And so what we do, we send our troops over there to crush the rebellion. And the way that we crush the rebellion is by putting civilians and moving them into camps. Now, we move them into camps so that guerrilla warfare is not able to spread. And so we limit them and put them together in these areas where they can't leave, so we can root out who the guerrilla warriors are. So very much so doing exactly what the Spanish did, what other European countries had done before. So we end up winning, and we win pretty hard. And so what we do is we make the Philippines basically, they're allowed to elect their own officials, but we get to set who the governor is, and we get to set who their like Senate is. They're allowed to elect their House of Representatives. So the United States gets to pick 2 out of 3, whereas they only get to pick 1. So obviously the Philippines get very angry at this, saying, hey, we should be independent. We should be able to rule ourselves. But the United States isn't done with the Philippines just yet. Now, the last one that we're going to talk about is the Boxer Rebellion. Now, we talked about in class about China and the open door policy, which opened up China to American trade with the spheres of influence. So European countries have been taking over China's economy for years, and the open door policy only adds to this. So a group called, there's a Chinese group that develops, which begins killing foreigners in China. So they go and they start this rebellion that's going to try and drive the foreigners out of China to give China back to the Chinese people. Now, they're called boxers because many of them were trained in martial arts, and so the soldiers, European and American soldiers, called them boxers. So what you see is this group that begins beheading and capturing um, Europeans and destroying European businesses and beheading Chinese that are loyal to the Europeans. So what happens? A coalition of nations joins together to fight the Boxers. Really unprecedented in our history, that the fact that the United States, the British, the French, the Germans, the Japanese, the Russians all joined together to fight as one against the Boxers and put this down. So ultimately, we send all these troops over there and we put down the Boxer Rebellion. So from here on out, it's kind of one of the first times that we've, as the U.S., we use our military to protect our rights to trade in the country. The Boxers are trying to drive our trade out of the country, and we send our military in to continue enforcing that we are allowed trading in China. But the Boxers, a great example of people who are trying to fight against American imperialism. So you'll see here's a picture of a war from the Boxer Rebellion. It was a short war, but the Boxers did a lot of damage, and the Chinese government ends up having to pay that money to the foreign countries that were in China. But China is going to continue being a country that is driven primarily by foreign countries invading them. Okay? All right, that's it for do people get mad at the U.S.? Hope you all have a good day. See ya.